Hello everyone, and welcome to this, the director's commentary, for want of a better term that doesn't sound quite so egotistical, to Green Harvest, which is now finally released in its entirety, at least in episodes. I don't know if I'm going to release this commentary before or after I release the final film, probably after, to be honest. So let's start this off by saying that Green Harvest is now out, and a lot of people had some various questions or just wanted general insight into the behind the scenes making of it. So that's what we're going to do. And there was a little sound effect from Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. Some people wondered why one of the song credits was Smooth Criminal. That specific sound is from that song. There's lots of little sound editings throughout this video, but we'll go through them as we go. So this scene was actually shot with Fraps about a year ago. I think I filmed this in about October, November of 2017. And then the rest of the year I spent deciding exactly how I wanted to do Green Harvest, and various things set it back. Oh, there's the title card. Various things set it back, like I was at university again briefly to do like further qualifications for my real life job, so I couldn't really spend that much time working on videos. And then other various commitments happened over the summer that meant I couldn't really dedicate as much time to Green Harvest as I wanted to. And then, as it kind of built up to the film's release, I wanted to make the episodes, quite a few episodes in advance, so I could carry on consistently releasing them week on week initially, just so there wasn't a massive delay like Duna Attacks and Expedition Eve suffered from in places, particularly Duna Attacks, which technically came out as two films. There were 2 seasons to it. But luckily, that didn't happen for Green Harvest. But here we are now, getting to the stuff that was filmed this year. This was probably filmed around July. I think it was filmed around July or late June, I think. You can see the local time that just ticked over from 10:09 to 10:10. That's a continuation of Expedition Eve's new scene, which ticked from 10:08 to 10:09. Now it's 10:10. So just a very odd little Easter egg that probably no one noticed or would even care if they did notice it. And then we're just getting to the satellite itself. So this is all still part of episode 1. I'll probably just point out whenever we've changed an episode. But episode 1 had a much more sort of light-hearted feel to it compared to the later episodes, particularly from like episode 4 and onwards, really. And like, you can see the fake jargon here going on as everything's firing up. Just like, because although I think Green Harvest took itself seriously to an extent, I never wanted to make it lose sight of the fact this is a game about wacky tic-tacs in space, like you can't really take itself too seriously when you're looking at the source material and the context of it being Kerbals, which look ridiculous. So I thought try and keep the light-hearted tone, but obviously towards the end it's hard to have the story have the impact I wanted it to have whilst also keeping it. So let's just try and get all the light-hearted stuff in the earlier episodes where there's less at stake, where at this point not really much at stake at all. So I confirmed a lot of people's suspicions with this scene that the whole series is going to take place around Jewel, which was a fair enough assumption really, before I even announced the name Green Harvest. A lot of people assumed the series would take place around Lathe or Jewel, just because Jewel and Lathe and all the other moons of Jewel, I should say, are probably the most interesting places to visit in the Kerbal system, just because of Jewel's complicated moon system. Someone's like, it's probably going to be set at Jewel or Elu, because Elu, I guess, is an evocative destination for a lot of players because it has this perception of being very hard to reach because it's so far away. And I guess it is hard to reach to an extent, but it's really not as hard to reach once you know what you're doing as people would first assume it would be. So here's the epic cinematic ascent for this thing. I really liked the opening shot of this scene actually, where in which each engine fired up one after the other. I really liked the way that every time I cut to the cockpit views, is it Bill that Jebediah is flying with? It always happened to be doing some sort of reaction animation. So I thought that was kind of a nice... Everything just sort of came together well. Like, not a lot of consequence happens, at least not at this point in the mission. I think it was drawn out a little bit. I mean, the actual purpose of this episode was just to, A, establish the series, which is what Jebediah's scene at the beginning was all about, and then just to launch a satellite to Jewel, and that was basically all that needed to be covered in this episode, but it was kind of dragged out a little bit. And that's not me trying to drag out 10 minutes to get ad revenue, because the whole episode was under 10 minutes, but still, I think it was a little bit dragged out, but I was, over a year out of practice making cinematics of this nature, so I think I was still trying to get back into the groove of making things concise. But I think it came out regardless, and it is still I still regard it as one of the better episodes. Although I guess, you know, it's definitely not up there to the level of like episode 5 or 8 or something like that. But here we are, in LKO, I think. So I actually made a post on YouTube, like a creator post, as in you don't upload a video, you just make a status update, asking what people's questions are for Green Harvest, and they could leave comments on my Instagram or Twitter or Discord as well. And one of the questions I got, which got quite a lot of upvotes or likes or whatever platform I read it on, was the fact that, you know, they wondered how many missions were done legitimately without cheats. And that's difficult to, I guess you'd have to define what you call cheats. Because here, right now, I did technically cheat because when I actually filmed this mission, when I launched the satellite off the back of that aeroplane, the plane just crashed into the ground because you can't do what I just did in stock KSV, which is where the plane can fly back to the KSC safely whilst the rocket itself makes it to orbit. So I made a quick save just before I launched the probe, then, you know, filmed the bit with the probe going into orbit, and then I reloaded the quick save and filmed the bit of the space plane going back to the runway. So I guess that was kind of a cheat. But other than that, this is all done legitimately. This probe really did get to the dual system on its own power, really. I then had to do a few edits and stuff, so I had to then cheat it back into dual orbit and film the bit where we did the Tylo flyby and the ultimate Val encounter. But whilst, you know, some of the missions in this series do use cheats, I was very careful to make sure that the crafts would actually work if you were doing it legitimately, like in the style of my normal videos where it's just conducting a KSP mission. But just in order to kind of get the shots you need, it's very hard to do these sorts of things without cheats. You can modify the orbits to get the aesthetics looking just the way you want. So I guess I think pretty much all of the missions involved some sort of tomfoolery to try and get the exact right shots. But it's very important to note that all of the missions, bar a couple which will be obvious when we see them, are completely possible to do without cheats. But just for the sake of making this cinematic and, you know, cool, they did have to be cheated. But, you know, that's like saying, you know, none of the flights in Top Gun were actually legit, but it's all for the sake of film. So I think there's a little bit more. There's the Valhenge, by the way, and that concludes episode 1, actually, in just a second, when it cuts to black. In just a second. There we go. But yeah, so I feel like, you know, it's a little bit more socially acceptable to cheat flights and stuff when it's this sort of context. Now we are back on Eve, so this would be the start of episode 2. So the whole purpose of Jeb's scenes, really, was to serve as a kind of a more, I don't know, articulate, that's not the right word, more cinematic or more appropriate, less jarring way of doing a previously on Green Harvest. You could just have it showed to you, or at least explained to you by the video itself, rather than needing some kind of fourth wall breaking commentator explaining it. And I think, you know, I thought this was quite an elegant way of doing it. You may disagree, but I was quite proud of this method of doing it. Now here's Jeb approaching the wreckage of the Neptune 6, I think it was Neptune 6, the name of it, rocket in Expedition Eve. And this is actually the exact save file that Expedition Eve was filmed in. So this is all of this was all of the legitimate debris from that for Expedition Eve. I didn't place all this to replicate the launch site. That is all the actual real launch material that was left there in Expedition Eve. And this is the same rover, obviously, as well. This was all left exactly as it was. So all the Expedition Eve stuff in this video, or in this film, in this cinematic tour de force, I should say, were actually genuinely from Expedition Eve. And then there would normally be a title appear there, all in time with the music, but obviously this is not the episodes anymore, it's the film. And, you know, the episodes, the title, no one picked up on this, or at least no one mentioned the similarities between this and something else, but I based the title cards on Mr. Robot's title. I'm not going to spoil Mr. Robot or anything, but Mr. Robot, what it does at the beginning of each episode, rather than having the same title sequence every time, there'll be a USA Network, whatever the network is called. There's a USA Network Presents, and then a couple of seconds later the words Mr. Robot will flash up on the screen, but it's always such a cool, I don't know, entrance to the title cards. Like, I'm always sitting there like, I wonder where the title card's going to, oh, how's the title card going to appear? And I tried to sort of emulate that kind of style with the way Green Harvest title card just flashes up in synchrony with the music, or along with some sort of significant event, and it's kind of queued up by a Matt Lowne Presents. So, you know, it's a shame that kind of little aspect of the film that I really like is lost when you watch the full version. That's why that was one of the reasons why I recommended to people that I think Green Harvest works better as a series than as a film, but I know a lot of people were just going to wait for the film to watch it, so I thought I'll just release the film anyway. And I guess it is kind of cool to see it all edited as one giant video, but I think the superior way to watch Green Harvest is as a series, and also because the Jeb scenes serve more of a purpose in that they're there to provide a recap of the previous events, rather than just be a part of the storytelling, which they do work when they're not just being used in the context of explaining what just happened in the last episode. But I think it all just works better as a series. I hope this makes sense anyway. There's not really a great deal for me to talk about here, other than the fact that I think a couple of people actually noticed this, that some of the parts on this rocket, particularly the tanks the vectors are attached to, are the old components, and that's because the new part skins hadn't released when I filmed this episode of Green Harvest, and that's why all of Green Harvest, it never really shows any of the relevant KSP updates. Like the Kerbal EVA suits were redesigned, but the new designs are never featured in Green Harvest because I kept the same version to make sure that the mods would work, and also to maintain some sort of aesthetic consistency. And that's why that's why a lot of people noticed that the Eve scenes all featured a purple C on Eve, whereas obviously Eve now has a red C. Again, I kept the same save file I was using in November 2017 to ensure that Eve, maintained the same appearance. Luckily, Eve doesn't really feature much outside of the first few episodes. I mean, after episode 6, it's never shown again, and the exterior is not shown. And I think episode 4 is the last time you see exterior shots on Eve, so we're okay. But yeah, this was again. In fact, I think this mission was entirely done legitimately. When I said all the missions have some sort of cheating, I don't think this one did. I think this one is an entirely legitimately filmed mission, and I guess that's why this episode kind of feels like the Red-Headed Stepchild to me, because it just feels like a normal KSP mission video I would have done, but rather than have a commentary, it's just, quote-unquote voice acted with subtitles and a little story in the background. This is the most similar, I think, to Duna Attacks and Expedition Eve that this series ever becomes. After that, it becomes a lot more cinematic-y than either of those things, especially Duna Attacks. Which, a lot of people have said, for those that don't know, Duna Attacks has a very different tone to Expedition Eve and Green Harvest, in that it actually has the UI visible at almost all points in the film, and it's filmed a lot, like you can see the cursor moving around, because Duna Attacks was meant to be like a hypothetical story mode for KSP. Like, it was meant to still feel like someone was playing the game, but there was a story going on in the game as well. I then moved more towards the machinima angle with Expedition Eve, and then Green Harvest was basically like meant to be a reboot, a soft reboot. Like, Jurassic World is not a remake of Jurassic Park, so it's a reboot, a soft reboot. Just to basically, Green Harvest is meant to be what Duna Attacks might have looked like if it was filmed in the style of Expedition Eve. Some people on my Discord were asking me if I ever plan to remaster Duna Attacks and make that in the style of Expedition Eve, because now we have the trilogy of Green Harvest, Expedition Eve, and Duna Attacks. Duna Attacks kind of feels a bit odd. It feels a bit juxtaposed compared to the other two, but I think that's part of its charm, and I have no intention of remaking Duna Attacks. It's like, everyone got mad about George Lucas touching the original trilogy for Star Wars, and whilst I'm not saying this is any way comparable to Star Wars, it's kind of the same thing, I want it. It is what it is. It is what it was. I don't want to touch it. I like Duna Attacks a lot. But here we're getting to the now we're back onto the actual story, cinematic-y aspect of Green Harvest, rather than just me showing a space station get built. We're touching the rover down on Val, and a lot of people notice the similarities between this rover and the one in Expedition Eve, and these people are correct. It's pretty much the same rover design. I can't remember if I just literally used the same craft file from Expedition Eve. I should really slow down. We've got a lot to talk about. We're only 15 minutes into this hour and 40-minute film, but yeah, I think it is the same craft file. I mean, when it opens up and I get another look at it, I'll be able to tell. I feel like it is the same craft, and I just copied the craft file over, but I could be wrong. I don't really remember, to be honest. But there we go, and we've got the little rover sound effects as well. You hear the engine purring, but you probably won't hear it too well here because all the sound's turned down. But if you've watched the actual film and watched the actual episode, or watched the actual episode, then you might remember. I'm assuming you've watched the film or the episode because I don't. You probably wouldn't get too much out of this commentary, which so far admittedly has not been that relevant to what's going on screen, but still it's just kind of more of an insight into the making of the film. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on talking about what I see on screen, and then as I start to run out of things to talk about, I'll start looking more at the YouTube questions, which, we can have a look at some now. Let's open up my phone and take a look at the post I made at some of the questions whilst it's just the roller coasting towards the henge, the gateway opens and everything. So, okay, that question I have to answer as and when the scene comes up. That one I have to answer as and when the scene comes up. Okay, so most of these are just questions about how things were done. So I'll just talk about those, as they happen really, and now my internet's down so I can't load any more questions. Some people asked how I do the Kerbal voices though. You just basically go on YouTube and find any kind of speech or people talking with no music in the background, reverse that sound, and then just up the pitch a little bit. That's how the Kerbal voices are in the official Squad trailers, so I just did the same thing really. So it doesn't really matter what audio source you use, and to be honest, if you want to make your own film, I'd recommend using a different audio source to me, because you want it to be your own thing, right? You want it to be your own thing. So I know Cupcake Landers' film, which is so far 2/3 of the way through production, and he's been releasing that since before my channel even existed. So it's a very slow process, but that's fully voice acted for that film, which I was too lazy to do, to be honest. And I wanted to keep the same kind of sound effects and sound design and sound that Juno Attack Expedition Eve had, so I just used the same sound sources. So yeah, prepare the Omega, gotta get the hype build up, and as we coast along to episode 3, which is probably my least favourite episode of Green Harvest, I think, just because there's a little bit of filler in it. I think it's pretty much a sound episode, but there are a couple of aspects which I really am not a fan of in retrospect. I think it's because I was trying to make the episode a little bit longer. Again, it wasn't me trying to hit that 10-minute point of YouTube, because the video is under 10 minutes long. So this isn't like a backhanded way of me trying to get more money out of the series. I did try and prioritize artistic liberties over everything else for Green Harvest, because Green Harvest is never going to make as much money as a normal video. So, and I made it for me, it doesn't get as many views as normal videos by quite a massive margin, but I didn't do this series for the views or the clicks or the income. So it wasn't dragged out artificially because of that. It was more that I didn't want to release like a 6-minute episode and that was it. I thought people might feel like they didn't really get their money's worth. In retrospect, I wish I had just released a 6-minute episode without all the extra padding in it, but I didn't, so that's that. And here we are on Kerbin. People ask how some of the interior shots were done. Well, this is actually filmed on Kerbin. The actual inside of Expedition Eve base. This is the same base, but obviously I've just bent some parts. I'll show a clip of it on screen, like what the whole set looks like. But that's why the Expedition Eve base has this big silver cube at the base, rather than just using the actual crew cabins. Is because I wanted to be able to film interior shots more easily, with a bit more dynamics to it. And that was really the only way to build a custom set. And so to justify the shape of a custom set, you kind of had to just build this big goofy cube-shaped base. But that's that. And as we get to the actual present day again, or the past I should say, because the present day is Jeb, we go back to the past to look at the Omega. And the launch of the Omega isn't part of the filler. The launch of the Omega was really meant to be the crux of the episode, really. So we can cut to that. And there it is. So this was actually, I was unsure what kind of design I was going to be using for the Omega. The original design for the Omega was way different to this. The original Omega was just a giant cylinder with loads of docking ports around it. The cylinder would have been a giant cannon, and the actual launch of the Omega would have taken place over several different launches. So it had been launched about 4 different times. You'd see it all get pieced together in orbit, which I think might have been a nice video, but I thought it would have dragged a little bit, given that this is already like almost twice the length of Juno Attacked and Expedition Eve. I kind of wanted to minimize the amount of waste time there is in it. I know I just said that there's some extra filler in this episode that I didn't like, but those don't add quite as much time as doing this thing in 4 different launches would have been. So there it is, launching the boat up. Some people wondered how I did this to like launch the ship from the sea and have those launch clamps there, which traditionally only spawn at the launch pad. And that's because this is not being launched at sea, it is being launched on the launch pad, but I used the mod Scatterer to raise the level of the sea. You never see those like global warming pictures on the Kerbal Space Program subreddit, which thankfully are not happening as frequently as they used to happen, because that post got old quite fast. I kind of exploited the glitch that those players are having, where the sea level was being displayed as being higher than it should be. I could kind of use that to my advantage by offsetting the sea level to the point where it looks like the Omega is launching from the sea. And that's also how I achieved the Colossus launch in Duna Attacks, by having it seemingly launch from under the water. That's how I did that. And that's why the land masses you might see below us look a little bit different to how they would normally. It's because the sea level's a little bit higher. But there we go. I actually really liked the hot, almost hot rod aesthetic of the Omega there. But yeah. I think with the design of this, I started out with the bridge. Well, I used the Saturn V parts to get the scale I wanted, to get the actual central column of it, and then I constructed the cabin out of the lander cans. Everything on here is stock. I know some people don't consider the DLC part stock, but I disagree with these people. So yeah, everything here is stock, and I started out by building the bridge out of the little Mark 1 lander cans, and then kind of built it all from there. I ended up adding the extra arms with just engines on them, because the thing either was too heavy to take off and the thrust to weight ratio needed increasing, or the fact that because of the asymmetric mass I needed to add more engines further away from the center of mass to keep the whole thing kind of balanced out from a thrust point of view. And there we are rapidly approaching Kerbin orbit. For those wondering, because I mentioned earlier that some of the missions done in this video were done with cheats. Again, this is not done with cheats. The Omega going into Kerbin orbit was done completely legitimately, and as I said, even if it was cheated, I would have made sure it was still possible to do it. Even if missions were conducted using cheats in this series, they are completely possible to do without. They were just done with cheats just for the sake of getting the shots I needed in such a way that wouldn't have really been possible, or would have been way too time consuming to do legitimately. And there's the Omega accelerating to orbital velocity, as the subtitle there just described. So a bit of a mute point, really, bit of a moot point. But there we go, detecting another ship heading our way at FTL speed, faster than light. For those who don't know what FTL stands for. Yeah, I know, like, if the Junos have FTL technology, why don't they just warp closer? Like, you could... This is one of those... Green Harvest is one of those things where when you start thinking about it too much, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But that's why I went with a tongue-in-cheek approach to it. And, you know, it's more for people who like Kerbal Space Program, want to see like an adventure in KSP, rather than people who want to see a very well constructed film that makes sense all the time and doesn't collapse completely when you spend like 10 seconds thinking about the plot and how it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you know, I hope you still enjoyed it. So here gets to the part where there was a bit too much fodder for my liking, really. So everything up to this point has been exactly as it should be, and still is. It hasn't got to that. It's almost like I don't know the order. Here we go. We're seeing some pictures in the end in Kerbin's atmosphere. This was more, this shot was made for the trailer. Like, to get people excited. Like, why are there aircraft here? It doesn't make any sense. Especially when later on, when Duna does come into Kerbin's atmosphere, it's using an actual spacecraft rather than aeroplanes. Didn't really make much sense. I think it kind of is a bit tonally jarring compared to the rest of the film. There's the shot for the trailer, and then also this special effect is done. I left this shot in because I had to explain why there's an Akranaplan there. I thought, well, a lot of people did like the plane shots from the Discord server, so we'll just keep them in. There's my Akranaplan. The cannons do look a bit naff, but they're meant to be Tesla cannons, so I thought, well, I don't really know what that would look like. It makes no sense, right? A Tesla cannon would have no effect on an aeroplane, but shh. This series, don't think about it too hard. And then why is this thing here? This was actually a tank made for Junior Attacks that I never used, so I thought, oh, I forgot I had this craft file, let's use it. And I probably shouldn't have. This didn't really add anything to the story. That's the one and only time we ever see the Juggernaut tank. But there we go. And this is the forge. Again, just to tie this into Junior Attacks, you know, it's like they rhyme, you know. And there is the shot of Jewel Station getting destroyed. Basically because I needed a way of getting Kerbals to be stranded on Lathe, and I thought, well, this works. This is fine. And there we go. Thus concludes episode 3, nearly. I probably shouldn't have said that. I think I spoke a little bit too soon, but there we go. So I don't think there were any other questions people had on YouTube and Twitter specific to episode 3. My internet looks like it's back. So... well, here we are back on Eve. Right where we left off, we can get into the Expedition Eve rover, and I believe this is the final time we see exterior shots on Eve. After that, we're in the cave, so it's not really exterior, and that cave is technically not on Eve anyway. But we'll get to that as we get there. People were saying kind of, where did I get the idea for this series, or where did you get the idea for the series? And I was like, well, it is an original plot to my knowledge. I didn't knowingly steal the plot from anywhere. It has elements that are similar to Star Wars and Star Trek, I suppose, because I think, you know, all sci-fi takes some sort of inspiration from Star Wars and Star Trek, and I guess by extension 2001: A Space Odyssey has some vague links to this thing, but not too much. I did think about making the wormhole scenes a bit more reminiscent of the 2001: Space Odyssey wormhole scene, but I went with just doing my own sort of thing, to be honest. So yeah, here's the shot that you'll see. This is the one shot of the ship I had at the time, and I did overuse it a little bit. I think it's been used 2 or 3 times at this point. It's going to get used again. Just that one shot of the Duna ship drifting slowly towards Kerbal. Yeah, there you go. There's the really quite janky, actually, Omega logo, but at the time I quite liked the way it looked. Kind of wanted a Greek letter. Kind of looks like a very 90s kind of take on a Greek letter, you know, the where everything was just needlessly jagged for the sake of looking cool. I don't know. Was that a thing in the 90s? I feel like it's a bit of an outdated design concept either way. So yeah, that would be the title card for episode 4, I think. Yeah, because episode 5 is the best. I think episode 5 is objectively the best, at least in terms of production value. Possibly episode 8 or 9 come close, but I think episode 5, slipping over my words there, probably has the best production value out of all of them. There's that shot again of the thing. I don't know if anyone plans on rewatching this. Sorry if I'm going to be ruining a few things that might break your otherwise perfect immersion and suspension of disbelief, I am sure. There's the satellite. By the way, these, for those that aren't aware, these buildings aren't part of a mod. These are all actually in the stock game. They'll be in your copy of Kerbal Space Program. Basically, the vehicle assembly building used to look like, well, I never show the VAB in those shots, but there's like a second Kerbal Space Center inland. This episode, actually, this was something people had questions about, but I'll talk about this structure as we get there. But yeah, no, it's an Easter egg. So the vehicle assembly building and vehicle assembly building, launch pad, and tracking station were overhauled in an earlier version of the game, but what Squad did was they took the old models and just hid them inland to make a second secret KSC. So that's where those satellite shots were filmed, as in, like, you know, the new satellite. Because if I used shots of the current tracking station, people would say, well, that's not a new satellite. That's just the normal tracking station, because I'm using a different structure. Kind of helps paint the picture that, yes, this is a new piece of technology, even though in literal terms it is much older than the current tracking station. So here is Valentina getting on board her SSTO launcher. And there we go. This episode actually has a lot in common with a video by Cupcake Landers. I honestly never occurred to me at the time how similar it was. I think I did get the initial idea for the tunnel sequence because I really liked that scene in Cupcake Landers' video, but I didn't realise just how similar everything else was. I guess either great minds think alike, or that video had far more influence on my brain than perhaps I remember it having. But yeah, Cupcake Landers, if you like Green Harvest in general and want more videos like it, some people ask for standalone adventures. Cupcake Landers is the channel I would recommend to you, because that's all Cupcake Landers uploads is little standalone adventures like this. And Cupcake Landers' production value is so much better than mine. No dialogue or overarching story really, which I like to think is what differentiates my videos from his. But yeah, bit of a tangent. This is not his channel. We shouldn't be plugging him too much. So don't subscribe to it. No, I'm joking. So yeah, I hate ion engines. This is actually more than one ion engine clipped into this just to make it a little bit faster, and also because I don't think this thing's thrust to weight ratio would have been quite tolerable enough for a safe Mun landing. It might have been, but just for the kind of shots I wanted it to have, it wasn't really enough. So there is actually more than one ion engine clipped in there. I can't remember the exact number, but the thing with ion engines is that they can't overheat each other. So you can basically clip as many as you want into it, and it won't have any effect on the performance. So yeah, this rocket landing was done using cheats. In fact, I think I turned off crash damage there just so I could touch it down faster, because touching it down really slowly ended up wasting a bit too much time than what I wanted. And the video, I didn't want the videos to be too much longer than 10 minutes, because otherwise I was conscious that the whole film would end up being too long. So for the sake of getting that landing to be a bit faster, if it meant it was touching down a bit harder, I just turned off crash damage. I'm pretty sure it would have still survived. I mean, it can survive without crash damage, because the first take was done without crash damage. I'm like, oh, this is just taking so long for this shot to conclude. And when I sped up the footage, it looked a bit weird. So I thought, let's just literally crash it down a little bit faster and we'll turn off crash damage just to make sure it's okay. So here we are, approaching the underground superstructure, which originally was going to play a far more significant role in Green Harvest, but again, when the runtime started to get to be too long, I had to cut this sort of side plot short. So, I'm sure a lot of you will know this, but just in case those of you that don't, which is quite a lot of you, one of the most asked questions was how I achieved the underground structure on the Mun. This is how. So this is actually just the little cargo bay sitting on top of the Mun's surface. Nothing else. So everything you see just there, that's the entire structure. Still just one structure, and we're going to cut to Minmus. We're now on Minmus. So this is now another structure. So you can see that shot, that cut. We're now in a full structure that is not underground. It's just an above ground surface on the Minmus flats, just because Minmus is far easier to film on when using ion engines, because the gravity is lower. So it was far easier to then steer this thing around and get everything working just right. But I didn't want to make this episode take place on Minmus, just because that would be a bit too similar to Cupcake Landers. And here we are going around the tunnel. So the tunnel itself is actually sitting on the surface of Minmus, and the tower we just descended is just that, a tower sitting above the tunnels. The tunnel is nowhere near as elaborate though as it comes across in this video. It's just like a big S-shaped structure that I built, and then just repeatedly flew end to end again and again, and then pieced the shots together in such a way that it looked like it was a far more significant structure. And then at the very end is this bulkhead. So in the original idea for Green Harvest, later on we'd be opening this bulkhead and there'd be a little plot exploring deeper into the base. But you know, time constraints and all that, it didn't go much further than the Darbles explaining this thing's function as an Eternalin mine. But I think, you know, that was a fair enough conclusion to this little subplot, and I didn't think it was too wasteful. And it was kind of a cool little shot, even though it doesn't add that much to the plot. In fact, in terms of significance to the plot, it doesn't really advance it whatsoever. But in terms of just a visual spectacle, because first and foremost, this is meant to be just like a cool thing to watch from the perspective as a player of Kerbal Space Program. I think this is kind of a cool thing to watch happen. So that's why. Not stock parts, so those are Kerbal Engineer pieces, which may as well be stock. Let's face it, Kerbal Engineer should be stock. I've said this for a long time. And then we can depart. Kind of looks a bit janky, that transition from those two pieces. And then we're back on the Mun. Again, we haven't actually risen out of that structure. We just flew the couple of feet it takes to emerge from that small cargo bay perched on the surface of the Mun. But yeah. I now wanted some sort of justification for Val heading off to the Duna Dreadnought. Again, you know, when I said earlier, this is kind of meant to be what Duna attacks would look like if filmed in the style of Expedition Eve. So we're on episode 4 of Green Harvest, and episode 4 of Duna Attacks ends up with the Kerbals boarding the main Duna spaceship. So this is kind of what we're doing here, although obviously the story doesn't really get much further than Valentina literally just boarding it and nothing else. But this episode is the first episode that blends completely seamlessly with the next one, like it's literally the same shot. The first shot of episode 5 is the end shot of episode 4, whereas all the others it ends with either a cut to black or a fade to black, and then it goes back to Jebediah on Eve retelling the previous story. This is the only episode like that, I think, at least at the moment. I know later on when Jebediah's arc concludes and everything's now in the present day, there's none of this hopping back and forth between the past, then it gets a bit more consistent. But this is the first time it happens, at least. And this is where probably the biggest error on my part happens. You can see the giant SAS units there. There are some really tiny little probe cores, and that's because for some reason tweak scale glitched out, so you have tiny little probe cores there, whereas in all the other shots of the Duna battleship has correctly scaled command pods. But I think the most offensive error with tweak scale in this particular sequence is coming up in just a second on the left-hand side of the screen. Wait for it. Oh, there we go. We've got the little babby engine. The engine is not scaled correctly either. So again, in every other shot of this spacecraft, that engine is to the correct scale of the rest of the ship in that it's massive. But in this sequence of shots, it's tiny. And I didn't notice at first, and I don't think anyone picked up on it, so I've kind of done a number on myself now because now everyone knows about it. But I think that's part of the charm, isn't it? That goes to show that this was really created by I'm a real person, you know. I know many of you believe me to be a god, and you're not wrong, but I'm also I'm humble as well. You know, this is like a little bit of to show that the movie is made by a person, and there are going to be mistakes here and there. So I thought, I'm not going to reshoot this. We'll keep it in. And I don't think anyone really noticed it either way, except me. So it does still annoy me in that sense that, like, oh, I know it's there now. But, you know, again, part of the charm, I think. Part of the charm. But yeah, I think I covered all the things I wanted to cover when it came to filming the underground superstructure on the Mun. I don't think you need any further elaboration. I don't think I've got any pictures of the thing on Minmus, and I certainly don't have the quick save to reload it. So you can just use your imagination, I guess. And now we get to another interior shot. So this is about as basic as it comes, really, just a bunch of structural panels and this cargo bay, which I believe might have been from OPT Space. It's from a mod anyway. Had to switch to the vessel again just to use the action group to open that door before I could switch back to Valentina. But I kind of edited it in a way that it was Valentina interacting, but not kind of me, the player, controlling the vessel. I don't know. And then we seamlessly transition to episode 5. Episode 5. So we're about to conclude episode 4. And that's the ending shot of episode 4, and we cut straight to episode 5's opening, which is now. And there we go. Most of you correctly saw the similarities between this and anime laser fights like Dragon Ball Z. It's almost, I just took a random laser battle from YouTube, just from a random anime. I'd never heard of the anime myself, but I don't watch anime, so I'm not that familiar with the different kinds of anime shows out there. So it might be a really famous one. I just literally typed in anime laser battle and picked like a more obscure looking one, and then pretty much shot for shot, at least like camera angle for camera angle, because it was 2 people fighting, not just 2 spaceships fighting. And like the animation techniques and stuff, I kind of replicated from that clip. But the way I actually created the laser fight, so here you can see I made a sort of Photoshop cloud layer that I then just cycled over the screen to create the illusion of, like, I don't know, air or like, you know, after effect from the laser beam itself. And then the shots like that, I drew out the shape I wanted in Photoshop, saved that as a PNG. I then used the smudge tool to distort it a little bit, saved that as a PNG. Use the smudge tool again. I made about 5 separate PNG image files, and then just overlay, and then just like played them back to back, like 1 frame each picture over the top of the shot, and then I just looped that a few times to create the illusion of like a moving laser, when in fact it's about 4 or 5 still images that have just been played in sequence really, really fast on repeat. That's how the laser shots were done, basically. And the sound effects came from various different places. So I can't really tell you exactly where the lasers came from, because they came from various different places. But if you just go on Google or YouTube and just type in laser sound effect or whatever, you can get to the sounds that way. And there's the Kerbals there. And one thing people were wondering is that how did I get the blue Kerbals? Because I don't actually know that much about texture replacer mods. You may well be able to do this like in-game, but they were wondering, especially for shots in episode 9, the final one, when the Kerbals are meeting the Duna Kerbals, which I still don't have an official name for. I think in the script and what the quote-unquote fans of the series have dubbed them is Dunals, but I've never actually given a name for the Duna Kerbals, whereas obviously Kerbals are Kerbals and the ones on Eve are called Darbles. The Duna ones I never actually gave a name for, though. Maybe they're just Darbles, who knows. Anyway, regardless of this, I'm not too familiar with texture replacer. I'm not sure if you can have different coloured Kerbals in the same shot. I guess you could maybe reskin them based on gender, and then that would work. But I don't know about individual Kerbals. But what I did personally was I just modified the colours of certain Kerbals using Sony Vegas's. I inverted the colour and then rotated the hue and saturation till I got the colour of Kerbal's skin I wanted. And that's how I did it. And it was a very painstaking process in place, having to go frame by frame in order to make sure it masked out correctly. But I think the end result was worth it, and there are a few glitches here and there where you can see the blue Kerbals flash green for a couple of seconds, and that's because even though in the raw file it was perfectly done, during the rendering process, I think because maybe the frame rates were slightly different, it ended up not translating perfectly, but I think for all intents and purposes it looked good enough that nobody actually noticed, so it was fine. And again, as I said earlier with the tweak scale glitches, it was part of the charm of the series, I think. And did you see it? Did you see it? We have now changed Kerbal Space Program versions. We're now in version 1.4.3, I think, is the version, rather than 1.4.5. As a consequence of this, I didn't realise this at the time, but craft files are not backwards compatible. They're forwards compatible, but they're not backwards compatible. So then I had to painstakingly rebuild this scout ship piece for piece so it would work in this version of KSP, just because the part mods used on the Duna ship, at the time at least, I'm not sure about now, weren't compatible with the version of KSP I was using to show the Omega shots. So the Omega shot the Duna ship through different versions of KSP. Look at that. How cool. How cool is that? This is what the Director's Commentary is all about, you know, guys. The little insights like this. So, there you go. So that's actually Jebediah lying face down. He was playing the Duna Kerbal there. And this whole corridor was constructed out of Mark II cargo bays. I then opened the doors to create a seamless kind of tube, and, you know, Valentina boarded the things at the end. This is kind of done with cheats here. This is actually all just one vessel. The scout ship is part of the vessel at this point. That's how I was able to use the monopropellant thrusters without actually moving its location relative to the ship, and that's why it stays hovering in place and not just naturally drifting away slightly, which is what would happen in reality. And we are back on Kerbin, for those that might not have guessed. This is another interior shot. So again, I just constructed this, filmed it all on the launch pad, but filmed it in such a way that it seamlessly matched with what was happening with the exterior shots. So that's how all the interior shots are done. Like, people ask me, like, how do you get artificial gravity in space? I'm not. It's all just filmed on Kerbin, but it's all shot. It's all like clipped and shot to look like it's all part of one location. But yeah, those blue things are part of Interstellar Extended, I think. I'm not sure what they are, but they looked kind of cool as a set piece. Oh, there we go. And then we can just get to the hatch, and then we cut to Bill, or Bob, who is it? I think it's Bill, exiting the hatch again. So it looks like it's all part of one shot. But you can see the actual scale of the exterior of this ship doesn't really line up with the scale of the interior shots. You can see there, the big engine is back. It's back at the right scale. And then we can board the scout ship, ready to depart. You might notice as well that the distance from the Duna ship and Kerbin changes all of the time. Like, we're quite close to Kerbin here. Other shots, it's miles away. Again, just one of those little inconsistencies shooting across multiple save files, multiple versions of Kerbal Space Program. There are just going to be minor discrepancies here and there. But again, it doesn't really matter too much. So the auxiliary ships are here, and they were there to they were always there to channel power to the main ship. So that's what they're going to be. That's what they're going to be doing. And then we get to the shot of dual base established on Lathe. So again, people ask me, how did I get all these pieces lined up? This is all, again, just one vessel, but all the parts are offset to make it look like lots of little vessels all standing together. But that's how they can be all attached with those fuel lines, and it just makes the game run a little bit better when it's only having to, you know, render and load the physics for one vessel rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vessels, which is what that would be if it all was just individual ships. So yeah, obviously that was landed there using cheats. I couldn't have feasibly landed it there without having lots of landing debris around for, you know, where all the engines and parachutes would have gone. So yeah, that was landed using HyperEdit. And there we go. This is coming to the big reveal now of the Duna. I'll just call them the Junals, okay? Everyone knows what I'm talking about. The Junals are going to be using the wormhole on Val to suck Synapse's power through the portal and to the cannon of the Dreadnought. And there we go. So this was later explained to be a voice changer. It wasn't initially going to be a voice changer, why the Dunals have a really deep voice, but everyone thought it sounded dumb. So I'm like, oh, let's just pretend that was always what I thought as well, and we'll just pretend it was a voice changer. So I did kind of retcon that a little bit. I guess it's kind of an advantage of filming this in episodes that I can take feedback and modify future episodes accordingly. I think the scale was probably a little bit off there. There was the width of the beam initially was the entire width of the star, and then it gradually came to be this quite thin slit. But I guess you could say there was a bit of energy drop off over the distance it was covering. But I think just having a thin beam coming off the star looked a bit strange, so I just made it a thick beam. And you can see that the shot is enveloping the Omega there. So have to eject the escape pods. And one person again commented, were the escape pods landing faked? No, but when you see them landing, that is again just all one giant vessel, because KSP doesn't render lots of individual vessels very well. It tends to chug a little bit, and also the lighting starts to glitch out. I'll be able to show you an example of this, although I did do my best to edit out the light glitching. Also, here's a little error here, or I guess sort of mistake, is that the runway was destroyed in this shot, but it's not destroyed in the subsequent shots, and no explanation is ever given. I don't actually know why the runway was destroyed. I don't know how I destroyed it. Don't know, but there's a little mistake there, I guess. But yeah, that's all one vessel, hence that's how I was able to make all the parachutes deploy at the same time, and also have them all splash down at exactly the same moment, and again, just to help with the performance and lighting glitches. I can't see an piece of an example of the lighting glitch happening, but I think there's going to be one in just a second. Let me just increase the video quality. Yeah, you can see kind of the edges of this craft are starting to get a little bit wavery, especially if you look around the rims of the cannons. And that's because if there's more than one vessel in like a one place, it only lasts for a couple of seconds before the actual lighting starts glitching out. The most obvious example of this is a shot in episode 6 when the Argus flies over the dragon. Everything starts glitching out, and here's a nice little touch that I put in where the Omega lights gradually fade in that shot where the bridge has become separated from the rest of the vessel. Yeah, there we go. Destruction of the Omega has happened, but of course it's not really the end of the Omega. It does return for the final episode and the final battle, and there's obviously the Duna ship looming, ready to take the shot that ultimately does destroy Kerbin. Spoiler alert. But again, as I said, I assume that we all know we all know what's really going on here. So here is a shot filmed on Tylo. Actually, let me just what I can do here is I can actually split the screen in two to show you what it looks like before I added the visual effects that made it look like Eve. I just basically added all these color filters over it to make it look like we were still on Eve, but obviously we're not. We're on Tylo because there's a little Easter egg, I guess, on Tylo where there's a cave. So I filmed all this in the Tylo cave. So here's a side-by-side shot of before and after adding effects. Although a downside of this is that you can't see the subtitles. But again, it doesn't matter because you should have already seen this episode, right? So you can kind of see in this interior shot here that the actual inside of this cockpit is altered a bit with the color filter, but you know, I think it adds to the ambience of the cave in a way. So this piece of music, actually, I know you can't really hear it, but I was quite happy with the way the music of this scene fitted. I heard this song and I was like, this is the music we're going to use for the Eve cave. So yeah, there's that. And then we could just fade that split screen away now. And the music playing at the moment is the same music that it plays in Expedition Eve, where Jeb finds this UFO for the first time. Although I did have to redraw the UFO from Expedition Eve because I couldn't find the file I used. But the way I did it, I just took a shot of Eve standing in front of a blank wall and then drew a picture of a UFO and just kind of placed it over the top of the shot. And that's how that was done. Fairly simple, fairly, not amazing in terms of how it was done, but it was good enough and it worked, so that was that. And now we get to episode 6. Episode 6? Yeah, so the bulk of episode 6 at least. The Eve scene we just had was the beginning of episode 6. And the end of episode 6... probably my favourite scene of the entire film. So you've got that to look forward to, I suppose. I don't know if I'll do a commentary of that. I might just let it play out. And we can all get a little bit emotional together, but probably not. Because I'll probably think of something to talk about. Everyone joked here that, oh, there's so many landing gear there. That's how much this ship's needed. So when this was all done faked, basically these SSTOs and them getting to duel in various ways for various reasons, which I'll explain as and when they happen. But I made sure that I didn't want to show UI, but I always wanted to show that these ships do actually work. And so there's before, when I was talking earlier about the lighting glitching out when there's more than one ship in kind of the vicinity. This is why you can see the nose cone of the dragon, and in a second the runway is all glitched out. In just a second when we cut to the runway, there we go, you can see it's all glitching out. But yeah, the Artemis and the Dragon SSTOs account for some of my more impressive KSP videos, I think. The Dragon was actually a unrefueled Joule 5 SSTO, and that it could visit Joule, land on every planet and moon without refueling, and then return, so no money. Obviously the catch being that things like Bop, Pol, the whole thing would land on Lathe and return from Lathe, but you would need a separate lander for Tylo, and a separate lander for Pol and Bop as well, and Val, because, you know, mathematically speaking, with stock parts, you cannot do a Joule 5 SSTO unrefueled. Very recently, Bradley Wistons managed to finally crack the Tylo SSTO thing, where you could return from Tylo via SSTO without mining, thanks to the addition of the Wolfhound engines from the DLC. But you really can't do much more than that, unfortunately, at least in the current version of the game, which, you know, may change if and when more DLC is added. So this is the Dragon SSTO launching. That's why the Dragon has a huge cargo bay, because it was there to accommodate all of the dual landers. Obviously now we can use it as justification for having loads of base components, so it can the Kerbals can establish a home on Lathe as the music by Evan King kicks in. There are links to there is a list of all the songs used in the video description. You ask me where I get the music from. It's mainly from just, you know, looking up royalty-free music. YouTube has a good library of songs that don't have any copyright attached to them. Generally, I avoid artists like Kevin MacLeod because, you know, he gets quite overused at this point on YouTube. I kind of wanted to use songs that weren't too overused. I say that just as I know I've heard this song playing at the moment in quite a few other videos, but I think it's just obscure enough. It's not like the Kevin MacLeod. It's not the Danny music, basically. Or anytime I hear Kevin MacLeod's happier songs, I just think of Danny 2462's KSP videos at this point. So like, let's just avoid those because, you know, don't want to. This is my own thing, right? So here's the Artemis taxiing over. So we did a few shots of it rolling forward, then I had to restart the flight to get it into the correct place because this thing does not turn very well or at all on the ground. So I had to revert the flight to get it in the actual place I wanted it to be in for the start of the runway, hence why I kind of masked it with this cut up to the Dragon. So we are ascending the atmosphere, but at this point I just cut and then just cheated it the rest of the way into orbit because I knew I didn't need to show any more shots of it rising up because I wanted the majority of the SSTO ascension to be shown to be the Artemis A, because I think it's a better looking vessel. It's a more technically impressive vessel, having a capacity of 124 Kerbals, and I don't know, felt like it was more appropriate to show the whole Kerbal race on their ascent rather than just Bill, Bob, and Valentina. So there it goes, accelerating. So this is probably one of my best SSOs I've done in its original video. Ooh, just clearing the ground there. In its original mission, which I did link in the description of episode 6's release. In its original mission, it was a 124-seat Lathe SSTO that would go to Lathe, land on Lathe obviously, and then return from Lathe without the need for any mining. So a lot of gravity assists, a lot of planning had to be done. And I think I still am really proud of that video. And it is one of my more popular SSTO videos out there, so I'm sure you may well be familiar with this mission. But if you're not, that's that. Again, that's why I went, because I wanted to prove that these missions were possible without cheats and without all the cuts that mask most of the key parts of the flights in this series. I wanted to prove that these missions are definitely possible. So I went with SSTOs that people might recognize from other videos and that I have backup evidence to show that yes, these vessels do in fact work. Although interestingly, Jebediah departs for Eve whilst the Jewel and the Artemis depart for Jewel. In reality, both of the Dragon and Artemis's missions required an Eve gravity assist to get their flights going, so I guess all of the Kerbals would have actually gone to Eve together, although the Kerbals knew they wouldn't be returning from Lathe, so they didn't need to worry too much about saving fuel. So I suppose they could have gone straight to Jewel, couldn't they? Especially because the Dragon now has an IRSU on board to provide the means to refuel the SSTOs, so I guess this is all a bit of a moot point. Let's just forget that conversation tangent. Wow, 54 minutes. So in just a few minutes, or I guess in about a minute, we'll have reached the conclusion for Duna Attacks' runtime, which goes to show how much longer Green Harvest is. We're just over halfway for Green Harvest, and we're about to reach the full runtime of Duna Attacks. In fact, for all intents and purposes, we have, because the last minute of Duna Attacks is just like the credits and the post-credit scene. So yeah, there we are, orbiting. I really like the way this SSTO looks. It kind of looks a bit goofy with all those fuel tanks on the wings. I think it looks pretty good. And now we cue my favourite scene of Green Harvest. Yeah. Don't know. I think just everything came together throughout this scene. Just the music was beautiful. All the shots. I was like watching it back. I'm like, oh, I'm tearing up a little bit watching this scene. But I thought maybe this is just because I've been so spent so long editing it and everything. I've kind of become a bit mad by it. So I'm just so happy. I'm more upset and happy that I finally finished editing it. But then people commented saying, oh, I got really emotional watching it as well. I'm like, oh, I guess it really did have the impact I wanted it to have. I think it's because you never see Kerbal faces in this scene, so you never break seriousness. But there we go. The song is called Children by Approaching Nirvana, by the way, if anyone was curious. Yeah, don't know. Really happy with how this scene came out in a very genuine, non-jokey sarcasm sort of sense. But there we go. Yeah, the ships kept on drifting apart from each other, so I had to keep on getting them closer together again using cheats, because otherwise it's taken way too long. And as you can probably imagine, the game was running at a very, very slow frame rate. It was chugging at about less than 10 frames per second for most of it. So I had to speed it up quite a bit to get it to a playable frame rate. So in reality, manually getting the ships close together every time would have just taken so long. It would have taken about a decade off my life in terms of stress, so I thought I didn't need this in my life. The scene works as is. Let's just, keep setting them back together using tools. But there you go, there goes Jeb in the Argus. He leaves first, but then the Dragon and Artemis start leaving afterwards. But then by the time they've left Kerbin Sphere Implement, the Argus is still in a low Kerbin orbit. So I guess it doesn't make that much sense. So here people ask me how I did this. So the Dragon is able to take control of Artemis using, communications equipment, and both ships are able to burn together. A lot of people assumed I might have used the mod Burn Together, which would have worked. I did attempt to use Burn Together at first, hence why you may actually notice a Burn Together module sitting just below the nuclear engines of the Dragon, which will be more easily noticeable in the upcoming shot. But in fact, this is all just one vessel again. I did the trick of just combining them into one vessel, and then we can fly them together with slightly better performance and a bit more control over them burning exactly together. And that's also why they're actually, you might not be able to see it, but they're actually curving a little bit to the right. And that's because obviously the Artemis has a slightly higher thrust than the Dragon because it has more nuclear engines. But yeah, you can kind of see that burn together module there. So that's why they kind of started steering a little bit to the right, although you probably can't. The only reason I can tell is because I know that that's what was happening when I was filming it. And there we go. Time warping away from Kerbin, and then we cut back to Jebediah in the Argus. And this is probably my favourite part of my favourite scene is watching the Argus transition to Eve as we start to see the timelines come together, like that film that I won't say because saying the name of the film would spoil it. But there is a film where the timelines come together, like there are shots in the past, shots in the present, and you're watching those scenes come together like, the timelines are coming together. So this is now leading up to Jebediah looking at Kerbin. Then use some hyperedit to transition us to Eve, because I thought it would kind of detract if it was just traveling to Eve like manually. So I thought it'd be nice to do a nice slow shot of getting Eve in the same shot. And there is the very first shot of Green Harvest, which is actually probably the hardest shot of the entire film to pull off, was the very opening shot where it's pan up into space, and then it fades, and then so it pans up, and then it is immediately followed by a flyby of the Argus flying towards the planet. It was hard to do because it was about 3 different shots combined, and it was difficult to get all of the shots to line up properly without kind of looking weird. In fact, when it says Matt Lowne Presents, the Matt Lowne Presents is actually there to mask the fact that the Argus fades into shot rather than just gets closer and into view. So if you went back and watched it again, you would see the Argus actually fades in rather than just gets closer and closer to the point where you can see it. But there we go, it ends. Episode ends on the same shot it started with, and that brings us to episode 7. It's weird how we're now an hour in and we've had 6 episodes go past. We only have 3 more episodes to go, but the final 3 episodes constitute almost the same length of time as the initial 6. But yeah, episode 7, it was difficult to pull this shot off because I wasn't really sure how to make it look not terrible, and I guess it does look a bit cheesy. But the actual destruction of Kerbal is the same kind of shot used for the way a ship gets destroyed in the Super Smash Bros. Brawl campaign. There's a giant ship that's being controlled by Bowser and Ganondorf, and the way that's blown up is by Kirby on his little star, and it's just shot like a laser beam shoots through it. The background cuts to black, and then the beam disappears, like time stops to give you a sense to let it sink in, and then time unfreezes and the background stops being just black, and the ship gets destroyed. Essentially, I don't know how coherent that was. I was trying to time it so when we can cut to the shot now. This was the shot I was talking about. And time unfreezes and the planet blows up. And this was actually that was actually Alderaan's explosion from episode 4 remastered, as in Star Wars episode 4, the special edition. That was the same explosion there. I just stole it. So that's how that planet was blown up. So we are on Kerbal with another interior shot. The walls here are actually made using tweak scale. I just took an aeroplane wing and upped the scale a little bit. By the way, I was mentioning earlier, I went through quite a long-winded process of describing a shot in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I could literally just totally show you the shot right now on screen, so you can see the similarities for yourself. There you go. Yeah. I might have to do some... I'll probably have to distort it a little bit though, so it doesn't get caught by Nintendo's ridiculous content ID system. So yeah, I kind of had to do a fisheye lens effect, change the colours and add some grain to it so Nintendo won't pick it up. But yes, that was the shot. You may have seen just there in that shot just then, it's now gone. But I thought it'd be kind of a cool little touch that the Diablo ships would all be made using the old Kerbal Space Program pieces, because obviously the Diablos ended up becoming the Kerbals through evolution. So I thought, well, in terms of Kerbal's history, you know, eventually the old parts that the Kerbals used would have been the parts that the Diablos had, and then obviously as the Diablos evolved into the Kerbals, so did the pieces, hence why all the Diablo ships actually use the old KSP parts. I used the mod Kerbal Historical Institute to add the old pieces from the old version of the game to the current version. Sadly, this pack did not include the old Mark II cockpit, which is what I wanted to use in a shot for episode 9. So part of episode 9 is filmed all the way back in KSP 1.05 just to get the old Mark II cockpit, just for a couple of shots with the Duna Kerbals in it. So it could be the same ship basically from Juno Attacks episode 4. Anyway, Diablo's, I think there was much more else to cover I needed to talk about. Oh, I told a lie, didn't I? Well, there is another Expedition Eve. There is another external Eve shot. When I'm saying X and then followed by Eve, I automatically want to just say Expedition Eve. I don't know if this is clearly not the current version of KSP because it's the old Kerbal suit, but I'm not sure if this is the version of Eve that had the Red Sea. It may have been filmed in KSP 1.4. Whatever it was that they changed the colour of Eve Sea. So maybe let's have a little look together. I suspect, looking at the colour of the sky, that this is now the overhauled version of Eve. You see the little Eternalin hybrid there, so we can tell this is Diablo technology, and you can see some of the more veteran players out there may recognise these pieces as being the old Kerbal Space Program parts, and the pod we're getting into. There's actually a statue of that pod outside the Vehicle Assembly Building in the current KSP, just saying rest in peace, old Mark 1 command pod. So we are getting ready to launch. And yeah, I did think about doing a normal Kerbal Space Program vessel. The main candidate, if it wasn't going to be this, would have been the rocket used in Expedition Eve episode 9. I think it was episode 9, because I remember it being kind of funny that Expedition Eve and Green Harvest both have the same number of episodes. And yeah, the final rocket used in Expedition Eve, we would be here, and it could just be that the Darwalls have seen the way that Kerbals get off the planet, so they used the blueprints there to create a copy of it so that Jebediah can get off. But the Eve rockets using stock KSP parts look janky as heck. Like, they look dumb, basically, because they have to be so complicated generally. Although I suppose we are launching on top of a mountain, and so we could probably have had something way more simple, like Blunderbird 3 springs to mind. The ship I used in Blunderbird's episode 3, but this is fine. I thought it'd be kind of cool to showcase the Darwall parts, because, you know, damn it, I went to the trouble of getting the old part mods. I may as well show them off a little bit. So yeah, there we are, ascending through. Actually was legitimately a surprise when it started spinning like that. It's because I set the tail fins there to act for pitch, yaw and roll control, which the game did not like, so I had to disable the gimbal control from the actual fins themselves. And there we are, we kind of cheated ourselves up into orbit. Well, actually we didn't, but we had infinite fuel on, so pretty much the same thing, isn't it? Just because, again, this is meant to be a fantasy engine. So yes, this is the one and only mission which is impossible to do without cheats, but it's meant to be, you know, eternal empowered. It's meant to be a fictional spacecraft, so it doesn't matter, right? Even if you think it matters, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter, okay? Just come to peace with it, because we didn't want this mission to be too long, because at this point I was like, oh god, we're over an hour long. We're over an hour in, and we haven't even been to the Synapse system yet, so we should probably start hurrying things along. So yeah, Jebediah radioing in to the Dragon and Artemis. Again, there was going to be a big shot of the SSTOs landing on Lathe together, but time constraints meant that I couldn't do that. So, and you may notice actually that the anterior landing gear of the two SSTOs is pitched, like, angled up like that. That happens when the gear is about to touch down onto the ground, but hasn't. It starts to lean up like that to match the contour of the surface. But Matt, I hear you ask, surely it should be touching the ground, because, you know, physics. I know all too well that gravity is a thing in Kerbal Space Program, and that is because, like before, this is actually just one giant vessel, again to stop the weird lighting glitches of having more than one vessel within kind of physics range of another. The lighting won't glitch out, so it is all just one big vessel there, which meant that the lower ends of the base were actually holding up the front of the SSTOs, so the wheels weren't actually touching the ground. But obviously the back wheels were holding up the other end of the base, so they were definitely touched onto the ground. I did try and offset the space planes to the point where they would be on the ground, but I couldn't, and it got to the point where I was like, look, this is taking way more time than it's really worth. Most people are not going to notice or care or understand what's happening anyway in terms of why those wheels are like that, so it doesn't matter. And again, even if they do notice and it bothers them, it's part of the charm of the film, right? Just goes to show that it was made by a person, and it is just a film. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm trying to get across with that message, but whenever I see like mistakes in real films, it's always like kind of a nice reminder that, yeah, this was made by people just like me. So I don't know, maybe I'm alone in having that thought, but I kind of like it when I see things like that in films. Not to the point where it's just stupid, right? But when you see like a film on like the 12th time, you may notice the shadow of a camera in a shot, that sort of thing. It's like in The Matrix, when Morpheus opens a door, it's filmed from first person, and when you look at the reflection in the doorknob, it's actually, you can just see a camera, but they've dressed the camera up to look like Morpheus. It's quite funny, actually. Anyway, getting a bit regardless here. So we get another shot where I just kind of cheated this into the right spot to speed things along, because it's more about the spectacle of it, of Jebediah landing with the motivational music as we get into the final few acts of Green Harvest. So yeah, not much more to say really, other than allow this thing to touch down really. So actually the original plan was to not have the land. I know it's not self-destructed yet, but you guys all know the lander self-destructs. But the original plan was to not have it self-destruct, and then the Kerbals take some of its technology to construct the interstellar ship. But I don't know. I didn't want the Kerbals to have access to Eternal Lane in case that led to plot holes later on down the lines. Although let's just, in case I end up writing myself into a corner, we won't have that caveat of having the the Eternal Lane vessel there. So we just blew it up. And there it goes. What a nice little firework display there. And there goes Jebediah running towards the vessels. Again, this footage had to be massively sped up. The frame rate was not great. It was better because it is just one vessel he's running towards, but that doesn't change the fact that the vessel has an extremely high number of parts. So it's a while now before there's any kind of explicitly technical shot that I would want to talk about. So let's go through some of the some of the questions that were left on my public post that I may have neglected to address on the specific scenes as we went along. How did you build the scavenge together base on Lathe? It doesn't look very easy to land in one piece. So I think I have addressed that really. It's just it is just one vessel that I then just hyper edited there. You can offset parts quite a bit by holding down shift. You can offset them using the advanced move tools more than you would if you weren't holding down shift. So you could do pretty crazy things with the offset tool when exploited this way. What else is there? I'm literally now just scrolling through my phone. Really. One of the more common questions I was asked actually is, are you planning on making any more films? And certainly not set in this universe unless I have a really, really good idea, which is unlikely, because I thought I wanted it to be a trilogy. I've wrapped up the trilogy. I'm happy with how it's concluded. So I don't plan on making any more movies, at least in this universe. And honestly, follow-up question for this, which is what was the hardest aspect of these missions? And I'd say without a doubt it's not the missions themselves, it is the editing. Like, my Sony Vegas timelines are just insane for episodes of Green Harvest. Like, there's at least 30 to 40 tracks, audio tracks, video tracks. It takes a very, very long time to edit, especially all the battle scenes. So Green Harvest 5 damn near killed me editing that, especially because I didn't want there to ever be more than a week between episodes, and towards the end I was editing the episodes as I went along, so I was having to do quite crazy hours. I lost all my weekend time just editing Green Harvest, but it was worth it for the outcome. It's something that I wanted to have done. Here's a shot actually, and here we are on Kerbal again. A little stealth transition from outside the SSTO as we zoomed in. We've cut to a shot on Kerbin, and here, this shot a lot of people commented on looking quite good. Thank you, by the way, if you thought it looked good. This was filmed by, I built the bomb, put it in space to create that black, or at least darker background, disabled SAS and just spun it around and had it spinning. I then used the mod Scatterer. If you open the Scatterer menu, you can choose toggle wireframe. So you can essentially make everything, the 3D polygon wireframe, I guess. So you take that. So I've now got a shot of it spinning against a black background in the form of a wireframe. I can then use the green screen effect in Sony Vegas to remove the black background. So then I've isolated the wireframe, and then I just added that kind of blue hue TV effect to make it look like a hologram from Star Wars. That's how that shot was done. And that's also the exact same method I used for the hologram in Duna Attacks episode... I have no idea. The second to last episode, I think it was, though, whichever one that was. So yeah, all the parts on here I made sure could have come from the Dragon or the Artemis. I forgot the name of the ship there. Yeah, now it comes to going to the Synapse system, which we'll talk about the Synapse system more once we're there, which will be a lot easier to do. Let's see what else. Yeah, a lot of these questions now are relating to the Synapse system, so I may as well talk about those once I'm there. Will you do another movie? So actually, one of the questions was from Banowet's Films. How long did it take to record the scene where they build the new ship on Lathe? Was it a mod, or did you say what it was? I put the ships there using HyperEdit or Vessel Mover or something, made a note of the exact coordinates, then disassembled them in the spaceplane hangar. So I removed certain parts of them. Then I very carefully used Vessel Mover to place them in the exact same position as they were when they were fully assembled. So then I had the two shots, and then I just took a time lapse of like dual orbiting and to represent time going by, and then I just put them all together, and that's how I made it look like they were disassembling the ships to make this one that you're watching now, I suppose. Will you make a prequel? I think he means prequel. From the age when the Kerbal race got separated to different planets. No, not really, because that was what Expedition Eve was all about, really, just to give the backstory for that. So why haven't you used any weapon mods? I don't know, because weapon mods, it would look kind of like, oh yeah, that's that mod I recognise. I think it's a lot cooler to have the big lasers that just look like cool sci-fi, like, wow, what was that? I didn't expect that to happen. When I'm like, hey look, it's the gun from BD Armory. Hey look, it fired exactly like the gun from BD Armory. And being able to use special effects gives a little bit more room for artistic liberties. But then I thought it would kind of have to be all custom effects or no custom effects. Like I would either just use all weapons from a mod or no weapons from a mod, if that makes sense. I think if it was a mixture of giant lasers and BD armory, which a lot of them are based on real weapons, I feel like it would have been a little bit of a juxtaposition, really. It might look a bit strange, and I do prefer having the custom effects. So even though it's a hell of a lot more work, I think it's worth it. So that's kind of why I didn't use BD armory. That was actually one of the big criticisms, like, why can't you just use BD armory? I'm like, well, I just didn't like the way BD armory weapons look, sorry. Anyway, I know that's a very vocal minority of you, so I know most people. Here's a shot that took way longer than it should have done. You can see there all of the windows are translucent, so you can see the interiors. That shot probably took about 15 minutes to make, because I had to individually mask off all the windows. Actually, it probably didn't take 15 minutes, but it took a long time to do, considering how short it was and how insignificant it was to the overall, I don't know, scene as a whole. But here we are doing the beautiful little shot up as we go from length. I try to avoid doing like obvious jumps in the amount of time warp being used. Like I'm trying to keep if I'm using time warp, then it's obvious, but I don't want to, like, I don't know how to describe this, but I'm hoping that you understand what I'm saying, is that when you change time warp, you can very obviously see the jump in the actual speed of what's happening on screen. I didn't like that just from the cinematic point of view. So time warp's fine, but you have to keep the same amount of time warp going. I know this wasn't the case for when the ship was flying away from Kerbin in episode 2, you know, when the space station was flying away from Kerbin, time warp suddenly changed. I thought it looked kind of dumb, so from that point on, I didn't do it again. No one actually asked how this effect was done, but I'll explain anyway, because I imagine some people might have that question even if they weren't around to ask it when I made the post asking people to leave questions. It was actually a complete accident how I achieved this shot. I basically because Val is interesting in that it has basically two distinct colours. It has a light colour and a dark colour. Dark colours representing the flats, light colours representing the mountainsides. I basically created a blue screen effect where the colour getting screened away was the exact colour of Val's slopes. So you can see there, all of the purple bits would actually have been the lighter blue colours on Val, and then I just placed this kind of like purpley texture underneath and just put a camera panning over the texture to make it look like it was all like, I don't know, pulsating underneath. So that was kind of the effect, because I wasn't really sure how I could make this ship land on the Valhenge and keep that black hole effect going, because the effect that I used to show the portal opening was just a flat effect that I downloaded from YouTube. I wouldn't be able to manipulate that myself. So there we go. Into the wormhole. So that was kind of why I thought, let's just make it so like the wormhole is expanded. So a few different shots here. This tunnel effect is from Doctor Strange, the mind control scene where, is it Tilda Swinton? Enters his mind. It's that really trippy scene. And then the actual shot just there of the ship stretching through hyperspace, I basically changed the FOV in KSP to be the highest it can be. I then scrolled in really quickly and then scrolled out really quickly, whilst at the same time pressing right on the keyboard so that the camera's panning around. It created that nice cool little flyby effect, when in reality it was just a shot of the ship being stationary, but I was changing the way the camera looked, so it made it look like it was flying by. And there we go, now we are in the Synapse system, and contrary to what some people might think, we're not actually in the Kerbin system, and I've changed the colour. This is an actual star that was created by Games Links. It's not available from a public mod, like you can't just download the Synapse system, unfortunately. It was custom made specifically for Green Harvest, but it was modified from the mod Games Links' Planet Overhaul mod, so if you want the Synapse system, you would download that mod, but it's not a green star, it's actually a purple star, and the planet that we visit doesn't look like it looks in Green Harvest. It's the same planet, but I edited the colours on it so that it would look different. So that's how you get the Synapse system if you want it. And some people asked if I can provide them a link to download Synapse, and I can't for a couple of reasons. First of all, the planet pack I'm using here is no longer compatible, at least this modified version of it is not compatible with the latest version of KSP. And also, you know, it's like, I think it'd probably be better if you made your own series, right? Like Green Harvest, that's my thing, you know? Like, you should make your own. And that's not me saying like no one else can have it from that like selfish point of view. It's more like maybe you'd probably get a lot more respect from viewers if you like were to make your own series, I suppose. I don't really know if this sounds really arrogant and egotistical of me or what, but that's not my intention if it is. So anyway, here's the planet, the map screen. So I made the map screen in just a second. I basically took a picture of the complete map screen, masked out the orbital paths using Photoshop's clone stamp tool, and then just reversed the order, so I kind of made it look like the map screen was appearing. And you can actually see that if you look closely, we're in a binary star system here. In those shots, you might want to rewind if you missed it, because I don't think there's any other shots with the second star in it, but there is a star slightly further away from Synapse that is just a normal looking colour. We're in a binary star system. Just a little, there's nothing more for me to add here, but it's just a little interesting tidbit, I suppose. But yeah, as we pan along our way to the planet, which I'm not going to lie, I don't remember the name of the actual planet in the system, but I'm sure if you just, I don't know, downloaded the mod and then, you know, flicked through the different planets using the orbital cheat tool, you would find it quite easily. So I've actually found this song, I don't think I found it by accident, but I saw the title of it. It's called Frontier, and it's by Approaching Nirvana, who make pretty good songs. So I'm like, oh, I'm intrigued, let's listen to it. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like, this is the song I'm going to use. This is definitely the song I'm going to use for arriving in the Synapse system, because it's got such a good little ring to it, I think. Same for the actual song that leads up to the credits of Green Harvest. As soon as I heard it, I was like, this is the song I'm going to use. Originally, I was going to use Arcadian Walnut's cover of Starman by David Bowie. For those who don't know, the song used for the credits of Expedition Eve, and you know the melodic, that female singer singing that song in Expedition Eve, that song, that's Arcadian Walnut singing that. And you know, she did say that I can use her songs in videos, but I thought I just don't want to, especially with it's a David Bowie song, they can sometimes be quite mean about monetization. David, like the people that, the record label for David Bowie is super on it when it comes to giving copyright strikes, and they will copyright strike you even if you cover the song. Even though the artist is dead, it's not like he's getting any credit. So this is purely record label greed, but this is another matter we're not going into here. So some people noticed actually that rock came dangerously close to the destroying the ship. Rewind the tape, watch again. The ship actually clips through that rock. It just clips through it, but it does clip through it. But luckily the rocks aren't solid, so it didn't matter. So yeah, look at this. It's like they rhyme. You know, the opening shot was the sunset on Lathe, and we're ending with a sunrise on this, I don't know, unnamed planet. Actually, I guess the episode hasn't ended just yet because we still need to do some science. The original script for Green Harvest had a lot more like scenes of various planets in this system, and in fact the original ship was far more complicated than it is. Again, in a similar case to Omega, it was going to be a multi-launch ship with lots of different components, and there'd be like smaller ships that would break away from it and land on different planets in the system to go and grab more fuel, fill up their ore tanks, and then bring them back to the mothership, and the mothership will use the ore that those little ships mined to refuel itself, and it would fly around. But I was getting to the point where I was like, look, this series is getting way too long. I really want it to be an hour and 20 minutes. So we're 20 minutes over at this point. Like, the point we are at right now in the commentary would have been the end point according to my original intention for the film's length. So I was like, we need to just streamline it a little bit, and it makes more sense if we're building it out of SSTO parts that it too would be an SSTO using the same parts from the other ones. So that's kind of why. And I think, you know, I don't know, it would have added too much to the story anyway if it was a multi-launch process. So we went with just this, and again, time restrictions meant that I couldn't do lots of different planet visitations in the Synapse system. Here's an actual shot from Expedition Eve. It was just re-rendering of the MP4 file because I no longer have the Fraps footage, so just in case that footage, I mean, technically the footage just dropped a little bit there in terms of quality, but I think it wasn't too noticeable for you. The footage in this whole commentary, by the way, is far inferior to the actual footage you would watch in the full movie. That's because the full movie took 70 hours to render, because I was rendering it from the raw footage, where I'm currently rendering this from the made MP4 file, which will be much, much faster. So logistically, if I want to get this out anytime soon and I don't want my PC running for another 70 hours, I just did it this way. Because I think you're here mainly for the commentary rather than, you already know what the film looks like, so you probably wouldn't. I don't know why I'm telling you this, really. So there's the bomb going down. In reality, the bomb has nowhere near enough delta V to crash itself into the star, but I guess it doesn't actually need to crash into the star. It would just detonate somewhere near the star, and that would be it. I mean, we all know it's not really a bomb. It's just a tool that diverts Synapse's power. But yeah, here's the thing destabilizing, which in reality is just time warp. You can see the other star actually in the background of this shot from this binary system. And there goes the explosion. The explosion's from the Star Wars Force Awakens when the Republic gets destroyed by Starkiller Base, but it was heavily distorted to mask that, I guess. And then, of course, we get to number 1 of top 10 Kerbal Space Program Machinima plot twists video that definitely exists out there, I'm sure. And that is that the Darbles were the baddies all along. And much like episode 4 to 5, the transition from 8 to 9 is totally seamless. See if you can spot where it transitions. You'll probably be able to tell because I'll stop talking just so I can watch the transition, but whatever, I'll stop talking now. Anyway, that was the cut. I mean, it's obvious, right? You guys knew where the cut was. But yeah, you might actually see how I did the Darble skins. It was all done with texture replace. You can see the floor is a different shade of grey to the walls, even though it was actually the same shade of grey in the original footage. And that's because I created a layer mask that changed the colour spectrum, which meant that the floor got a little bit changed as well, because rather than just doing each individual Darble head, I just applied the effect to the entire floor, because then that would cover the Darbles. There we are, reverting the timeline here. I tried to pick the most significant shots. I think I would have picked slightly different shots if I were going to do this again, but I think it gets the message across well enough, I suppose. So I wanted to establish that everything's going back, finally culminating in the re-entry, or at least reappearance, because re-entry in terms of Kerbal Space Program has a slightly different connotation, doesn't it? But the grand reappearance of the Omega entering orbit. And this was a point where, so I mentioned earlier that Green Harvest took 70 hours to render. Not true, it took 36 hours to render. So actually just over 70 hours, but it had to render twice, because in the shot just there of the Omega launching, in the episode 9, that was when the Matt Lowne Presents title appeared, and I'd forgotten to remove Matt Lowne Presents. So at that point in the film, it just suddenly said Matt Lowne Presents, and I'm like, oh, great. So I'm going to have to re-render the whole thing in order to remove that text. So, yeah. Whoops. I know we're not kind of in the right spot, but I might forget to talk about it if I don't talk about it soon enough. But some people asked how I blew the ships up. In fact, I mean, we'll wait for it, because there's going to be a lot of ships blowing up in just a few seconds. I don't think there's much to talk about this current shot. It's just a ship landing there. For it coming through the warp hole, though, or the wormhole, whatever that black thing was, I basically just did a flyby shot of the aircraft, and then I took a freeze frame of the... Well, I took the first frame of that and just paused the video, and I then dragged that pause out, and then did like a little swirly effect, and then unpaused the shot to make it look like the plane was flying in. And here we go. So that was done by, first of all, firing the internal engines of the ship to blow up and overheat the central bit, and then the rest of it was blown up using the cheat object thrower, formerly known as Whacker Kerbal. And people said that's what they initially thought, but they couldn't see like a little white cube shape, which is what that cheat leaves. It will be like a sort of piece of like... So object thrower lets you throw these blank white shapes at things to blow stuff up. And they said they couldn't see that. If you look closely, you will see remnants of object mover. But what I often did was that I masked them out. So I took like a blank shot of Kerb in space and like placed it over the Whacker Kerbal or object thrower pieces to cover them up. So that's why you might not always see it, because it was manually covered up using Photoshop and Sony Vegas. And the parts here are using the B9 aerospace pack. So in a way, I guess it's kind of a shame, because it doesn't really do justice just how big the Eve ship is. I don't know if it's bigger than the Omega, but it's definitely of similar size. But it's very hard to tell because there's no like normal Kerbal pieces to give a sense of scale. But yeah, the parts and engines on that Eve ship are part of the B9 aerospace mod. For the people that were asking how the piece was done, and then like the parts on the Duna ships are from the Interstellar Extended mod. From the pure the reason for this is that the post-credit scene of Expedition Eve showed a Duna ship using interstellar pieces, so I thought we better just keep that continuity going, and you can carry on using interstellar pieces, even though in reality there were probably better parts I could have used to build the Duna ships, but they were more there to tell the story rather than necessarily being a spectacle in their own right. And again, in a similar vein to the Eve ship, there was the lack of stock parts making up the bulk of the Duna ship constructions meant it's hard to get a sense of scale, but the Duna dreadnought that's now been destroyed was absolutely huge, which I guess it does help that Valentina then starts flying around it, and then you can see how big it is. But for the most part, it is difficult to get a sense of scale, at least compared to something like the Omega or the shots used in Duna attacks, like the Forge, which were all done with stock pieces, so you could really get a sense of how big they were. I don't know. And obviously rewinding time, because I was like, this was the hardest part to come up with a plot, because I knew there'd be some sort of, because I'm like, well, I mean, we know that the Darbles can revert time, so surely they would be completely invulnerable in a fight. How am I going to make it so they have time warp technology that makes sense? Then how would they reasonably be defeated? And I'm like, we've got Kraken Knights, let's get the Kerbals uncover something like Eternalin that allows time warping in a similar sense to Eternalin. And then how can we have that fight? So like maybe they can trap them in a pocket universe. So I guess it was obvious to fall through, but I did spend a long time thinking about how to pull this off. And here we are in KSP 1.05, and you can tell this was before they optimized the performance, because look how choppy this frame rate is. And this is with the footage sped up as well. But I really wanted to get the old Mark II inline cockpit back, because you can't get that from a mod. Even the Historical Institute doesn't have that part. That's why the lighting looks a little bit different in this shot, because lighting looked a bit different. And people were asking me how I got that nice, smooth, hovering landing, and that's because I hacked gravity. So yeah, how many versions of KSP does this series span? I'm trying to think. None of them use the most up-to-date version. This was, so there's 1.05 just for those flyby shots. This was filmed in 1.4.5, and then whenever the Synapse system was on show, that was using 1.4.3, and for some of the shots with the Duna ships, that was 1.4.3. And some of the shots at the very beginning with the Jebediah scenes were filmed in KSP 1.3. So that's 4 versions of KSP we filmed across. So quite a high number, I think. And there's actually going to be a shot using the new spacesuits as well. I thought it'd be kind of cool if the Darbles had an interior shot using some of the new pieces from the most up-to-date release of KSP, but I just thought it didn't look quite right, so I didn't use those shots in the end. But yeah, here's the synthesizing the Krakenite to create the fuels. Although it'd be nice to have a little sort of Avengers team-up of Duna and Kerbal coming together to fight off a common enemy. Just like the Shakespearean masterpiece that was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, when Eggman and Team Dark teamed up with Sonic and co. in one of the most beautiful arcs in modern literature. Big inspiration for me, that series. So yeah, there's the Krakenite synthesized, and we can cut to the final shot. So people asking me, is Fury a reference to Fast and the Furious? And also no one mentioned to it this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The placement of that ladder makes no sense. You'll see it in just a second when it's on the runway, that the ladder doesn't actually lead anywhere close to the door of that. Well, it kind of does, but it doesn't go to the right place. And that's because this is exactly the same ship as the ship used in Duna Attacks Episode 4. It's the ship used to destroy the Darble, the Duna ship. It's going to be the same ship that's going to be used to destroy the Duna ship. They rhyme, you know, they rhyme. This is like a soft remake of Duna Attacks in a sense. But they have updated the Mark 1 cockpit. It used to be the old fighter jet style Mark 1 cockpit in Duna Attacks, and I forgot about this, and so the ladder no longer makes any sense in terms of that placement. So whatever. And then someone said, isn't it funny that they say speed is the objective, but we've only got one nuclear engine? I'm like, mate, look how fast we're ascending at like 60 degrees. Far steeper than most SSDOs, because it's the 4 rapiers burning. And this thing is designed to get to Minmus and back, basically. So it has way more fuel than is necessary for getting to LKO. So we could take a very, very liberal ascent. So this thing does get to orbit very, very quickly compared to other SSDOs. So we're fine. We're fine, right? We do make sense. Trust me. Trust me, guys. I know what I'm doing. As difficult to believe as that may seem. So, yeah. Cheats were used here, but not in the sense you think. We got our apoapsis to about 500,000 because I had the UI turned off, so I couldn't really see how much of an overshoot I was making. So I had to use hyper edit to lower my orbit way down so the trajectory was correct. And this was actually 3 shots overlaid. I did 1 shot of just Valentina and that Duna Kerbal there, and then a second layer just to change the Duna Kerbal's spacesuit colour, and then another shot to change his skin. So overall it was 3 shots in total. But, you know, again, one of those little things of like a shot that took ages to do and wasn't there for very long. But it's the little details, I think, that make films sometimes. So we are coming up to the Omega. It was upside down, and this thing, the Omega, turns about as fast as a bloody merry-go-round. So I thought, let's just leave it upside down. I can't be bothered to manually flip it the right way up. So then Jebediah is getting the Krakenite from the ore tank. It looked a bit weird having him just bump into it and that being how he got it off. So I did a stealth little shot to the Kerbal Space Center just to, it would be assumed that Jebediah is getting the ore off as that shot was taking place to mask the fact that he didn't actually do anything. And this was going to be it. It was just going to be that Fury saying that, and then Jebediah saying over intercom, "It is done," and then it cuts to the ground. But I thought, no, let's go one step further. We'll do an interior shot here. So here we are again on Kerbin, and there's the little capsule where the Krakenite could be inserted, and then it closes, and those fuel lines then carry it to the reactor. And you can see now that the color of the flame has changed from white to green as the Krakenite starts to work. And then we could do a dramatic cut to the exterior of the Omega as we get ready for the final shot, I suppose. So yeah, this music I've known for a while, actually, for a good couple of years, and I never really knew a good place to use it, but I thought it'd be a good song to use whenever revealing a big ship. So I thought this is meant to be me revealing a big ship in a dramatic way. Probably a good use of this song that I've had plans to use for a while. I was originally going to use it when revealing my 500-seat Lathe SSTO that I made a video of all the way back in 2017, but then in the end I didn't bother and just made a standard commentary. And there we go, trapped in the Pocket universe. I was experimenting with different ways I could use to represent this ship being suspended in a different, I don't know, a rift in space-time, not in either universe, but I thought the best way is probably just to invert the colours like that. I think did a pretty good job of representing that, but that's kind of what I did. But I was thinking for a while about how to achieve that look of the appearance, I suppose. By the way, if I ever sound rambly or like I'm not really coming up with, I can't really think of anything to say, it's because I've not scripted this commentary, as I'm sure you can tell, and it would take, it's now Wednesday, my dudes, and I want to get this out by the weekend, so this is going to take ages to render and ages to upload. I'm not going to bother, basically. I'm not going to bother rewatching this to make sure everything seems coherent. I'll just hope it does, which is probably a little bit ambitious, knowing my track record of making very rambly commentaries that don't make sense and are constantly changing tangents without finishing off the first thought, but whatever. This is the beginning of the end montage now, and I really like the way this series came out. Like, this is almost as good as the ending of episode 6, I think. Like, you get really tearing up here. So yeah, of course, this is a split screen effect here. The Duna Kerbals have their hue shifted, and here we are back in KSP 1.05 doing the ascent from the Kerbal Spacer, and again with gravity hacked, and obviously infinite fuel, because the amount of liquid fuel in there, in that lander for a mainsail engine, it would run out of fuel almost instantly, so infinite fuel was used. But again, I'm like, well, it's Duna technology, it works a little bit different, so it works. The forge itself as well has no means to propel itself aside from the solid rocket boosters that are there to serve as the upper structure, which obviously you can't use. So that's why its journey to the new planet is just done through shots of it sitting stationary over each surface, because it can't actually propel itself using rocket power. And then we get to the final shot of the Duna Kerbal looking out, hopeful, and he turns to face the Synapse system, and then a little cut to the title. And then the credits roll, I suppose. So whilst the credits are rolling, I guess I can quickly look at that YouTube post, but I think I've covered everything that I needed to cover. What are the buildings for the Kerbal colonies in Lathe after their accident? I think that was just someone asking, but it's just, I don't know, spaceship parts, I suppose. That's it, actually. How did I come up with all the names in the videos? I mean, I'm assuming he's talking about spaceship names, but in case I'm talking about the actual Kerbal names in the cast, those are the actual Kerbals used for the various different figures in the shots. The real heroes here obviously being the mod list. So there you go, those are all the mods. I don't think I missed anything. And then this is obviously the soundtrack order of songs used. There's a copy of this in the description. Some of these songs have licenses, and YouTube has a 5,000 character word limit for its descriptions for some reason. I guess there is probably a good reason for that, but it's a shame, because it means that in order to fulfill those licenses, I couldn't, because I'd have to add links for each to clarify each song and where to get it and what the license for that song is. I couldn't do that with the word limit, so I kind of say all songs by this artist and this artist and this artist fall under this license. Approaching Nirvana songs fall under this license. To do this, this, and this. But then I've added a link to a paste bin, covering all of the actual legal wording I needed to add. So it is my hope that if any of the musicians are watching this and listening to this, which is unlikely, but in case you are, know that I have fulfilled your license requirements, but I kind of had to MacGyver it a little bit because of YouTube's character limit for its descriptions. Did I say I think it's a 5,000 character limit, not a 5,000 word limit, by the way, if I said it was a word limit at the time. So, yeah, was there anything else I needed to cover just then? But yeah, in all the individual episodes, I did fulfill the license requirements. Hopefully I'm pretty much covered. But yeah, my words now echo what is on the screen. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to this commentary. I hope it was interesting. Maybe I'll make another. I did start making a vlog for the creation of episode 9, but in the end, it took so much work. It was started to take away from the actual process of editing it, because I was like, I just want to get this edited, and I keep having to stop and think about how I'm doing things so I can vlog this. I thought, I'd rather just make the episode good and not be incredibly stressed, or at least any more stressed than I normally am, so I abandoned the vlog. But maybe I'll use the footage I have and create something, but I think this commentary is probably going to be as far as I go, to be honest. So yeah, as of course, I thought, well, this would be kind of a cool way of justifying how Kerbals could quick save and revert flights and time warp. I did from the very beginning want to make this relevant to how players actually play the game, and I thought, well, reverting flights and quick save and quick loading are staples of Kerbal Space Program, because of course they are. So it'd be nice to maybe actually give some sort of plot justification for that. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed Green Harvest, and of course Judo Attacks and Expedition Eve as well, and this commentary track. That's it. That's all I have to add. Kind of emotional, really, that it's my final film that I ever planned to make. So yeah, no more videos going forward. I hope you enjoyed once again, and yeah, bye.